sea, all in search of ever more of these priceless snails. And these longer voyages would require new developments in shipbuilding. Since as early as the 3rd millennium BC, Phoenician sailors from the city of Byblos had developed ships with curved hulls, perfectly suited for travelling on the waves. And they had developed techniques for waterproofing the hulls of their ships using bitumen or pitch. In the Hebrew Bible, the 6th century BC book of Ezekiel contains one poetic description of a Phoenician ship.
They made all your timbers of juniper from Sinia. They took a cedar from Lebanon to make a mast for you. Of oaks from Bashan they made your oars. Of cypress wood from the coasts of Cyprus they made your deck, adorned with ivory. Fine embroidered linen from Egypt was your sail, and served as your banner. Your awnings were of blue and purple from the coasts of Elishah.
The Phoenicians were also some of the earliest people to notice the pole star, or Polaris, a star that happens to align more or less perfectly with the rotational axis of the Earth. This means that while all other stars appear to rotate in the sky throughout the night as the Earth turns, the pole star remains more or less fixed in place. This made it exceptionally useful as a navigation tool, a fixed reference point in the sky. In Greek, this star would even come to be known as Phoenike, or the Phoenician star. The Phoenicians' early voyages around the Mediterranean led to them encountering many other peoples, and among these they began to cultivate a reputation as uncompromising traders and shrewd businessmen, something that seems to have gained them some degree of unpopularity. Homer's Odyssey, probably written down in the 7th or 8th century BC from even more ancient oral traditions, describes the Phoenicians as cunning and untrustworthy, in contrast to the supposedly noble Greeks.
Thither came Phoenicians, men famed for their ships, greedy knaves bringing countless trinkets in their black ship.
And it seems the Phoenicians had become adept at metalworking too. The following passage in Homer's Odyssey describes an ornate bowl brought by traders from the Phoenician city of Sidon.
Then the son of Peleus set forth other prizes, a mixing bowl of silver, richly wrought, in beauty far the goodliest in all the earth. Sidonians, well skilled in deft handiwork, had wrought it cunningly, and men of the Phoenicians brought it over the murky deep and landed it in harbour.
As a seafaring people, the Phoenicians had a clear preference for building their cities on narrow, easily defended peninsulas, and where possible on islands set just offshore. Their most influential city of Tyre was a perfect example, located on a small island just off the rocky coast. In the Hebrew Bible, the prophet Ezekiel gives us a sense of the trade that the people of Tyre drove with their surrounding neighbours.
Tarshish did business with you because of your great wealth of goods. They exchanged silver, iron, tin and lead for your merchandise. Greece, Tubal and Meshech did business with you. They traded human beings and articles of bronze for your wares. Men of Beth Togarmah exchanged chariot horses, cavalry horses and mules. Aram exchanged turquoise, purple fabric, embroidered work, fine linen, coral and rubies. Judah and Israel traded with you. They exchanged wheat from Minnith, honey, olive oil and balm.
While the natural defences of their geography had kept cities like Tyre independent for much of their history, this wasn't to last forever. The 1st millennium BC was an age of iron and an age of empires, and soon the Phoenicians found themselves in a world of increasingly violent and aggressive neighbours. Perhaps the most terrifying of these was the power of the Assyrian Empire. From its heartlands in what is today Iraq, the Assyrian war machine would periodically stretch its power right to the coast of the Mediterranean and threaten to engulf the Phoenicians. One inscription from the palace of an Assyrian king gives just one example of the typical fate of a city conquered by the Assyrians.
That city I destroyed. I flung my soldiers like lightning upon them. I piled up heaps of heads in front of his great gate. Bands of captive soldiers I impaled on stakes on every side of his city. His palm trees I cut down, and from the city of Amity I departed.
The Phoenicians had every reason to be nervous. At the start of the 8th century BC, the Assyrian king Adad-nirari III conquered the territory of northern Syria, as he boasts in his royal palace inscriptions.
Conquering from the Saluna mountain of the rising sun, and from the banks of the Euphrates, the country of Hatti, Amurra in its full extent, the land of Tyre, the land of Sidon, the land of Israel, the land of Edom, the land of Philistia. I made them submit to my feet, imposing upon them tribute.
The Assyrians were now breathing directly down the necks of the Phoenician cities of the coast. But as time went on, the Phoenicians were able to carve out a niche for themselves that ensured they were quite simply too useful for the Assyrians to destroy. The Mediterranean Sea had long been an insurmountable challenge to many of the region's great powers. The Assyrians referred to it as Id-Marati, or the Bitter River, which they believed to flow around the whole earth, while the Egyptians referred to it as Waj Wer, or the Great Green. These empires were freshwater river cultures, and navigated the waters of their rivers in flat-bottomed barges. For this reason, they had always remained wary of the rougher waters of the sea. Assyria relied heavily on many of the commodities brought into the region by Phoenician traders: incense, silver and purple dye for their palaces, bronze and iron for their armies. And so Assyria offered the cities of Tyre and Sidon something of a deal. They would be allowed a degree of independence, so long as they ensured a constant flow of metals and other resources into Assyria, and so long as they acted as a kind of navy for hire, providing their ships and sailors to Assyria in times of war. The Phoenicians had little choice but to accept. But there was one problem. The Assyrian demands for metal were truly staggering, and if they were going to be met, it would require a drastic expansion of the Phoenician trade network. At first, the Phoenicians set up simple trading posts, anywhere they could find good supplies of metal. Archaeology shows they set up trading communities in Cyprus to take advantage of its rich stores of copper, and in Sardinia, the Mediterranean's second largest island, rich in copper, iron, silver and lead. At these sites, local people usually did all the actual mining, while the Phoenicians simply turned up to buy the goods and take them away by ship. From Cyprus and Sardinia, Phoenician sailors pushed on into the west of the Mediterranean and set up the small colony of Utica in North Africa, and even reached southern Spain, where they found that the mines practically overflowed with silver, iron and other metals. Archaeologists have found huge Phoenician furnaces in this region, designed for smelting metal ingots for transportation on an industrial scale, all to satisfy the demands of the fearsome Assyrian kings. Before long, the Phoenicians were sailing out through the Straits of Gibraltar, then known as the Pillars of Hercules, and out into the Atlantic Ocean. They set up a colony at Lixus on the western coast of Morocco and pushed further down the coast to settle what is now the Moroccan port town of Essaouira, more than 4,000 kilometers from their homeland. To finance these expeditions, the Phoenicians developed innovative monetary systems that in some ways represented a form of ancient capitalism. Phoenician society was dominated by powerful trading firms, usually run by a certain family, and they pioneered the use of interest-bearing loans for voyages, even developing maritime insurance policies, which paid out if your ships were destroyed in a storm or plundered by pirates. But perhaps the greatest of their innovations was something that we use every day, and that is the alphabet. Up until that point, writing had been a cumbersome and difficult task. The cuneiform writing systems that had been developed by the Sumerians thousands of years before and the hieroglyphics of the Egyptians were both difficult to learn and relied on the services of a learned class of scribes who spent years of their lives learning them. But the Phoenician alphabet was a masterclass in simplicity. It had only 22 letters and could be used to spell out words phonetically, leaving out any vowels. And, quite ingeniously, the shapes of the letters also gave a clue as to how they were pronounced. Their letter B, for instance, was named Bet, which was the Phoenician word for house, and its symbol was drawn with a pointed roof. This simplicity drastically reduced the amount of time it took to learn, and meant that common traders and merchants may have had some ability to read and write, and to keep records, essential for the complex business of buying and selling across the sea. The Phoenician alphabet was such a good idea that it was adopted almost wholesale by the Greeks, as the Greek historian Herodotus recounts.
These Phoenicians who came with Cadmus brought with them to Greece, among many other kinds of learning, the alphabet. As time went on, the sound and form of the letters were changed, and after being taught the letters by the Phoenicians, the Greeks who were settled around them used them with a few changes of form.
With the addition of some letters for vowels, what resulted was the Greek alphabet, which means that the Phoenician writing system is the foundation of all Western alphabets used today. The earliest piece of Phoenician writing was found on an inscribed tablet known as the Nora Stone, unearthed in Sardinia, apparently commemorating a Phoenician captain who may have died in conflict with the local people.
He fought with the Sardinians at Tarshish, and he drove them out. Among the Sardinians, he is now at peace, and his army is at peace. Milcaton, son of Shubna, general of King Pumei.
But for the most part, the Phoenicians seem to have interacted with the people they met relatively peacefully, and most of all, profitably. Before long, the cities of Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos found themselves at the far east of a sprawling trade network. Keeping such a loose and disparate collection of colonies together was no easy task, but it seems that here the Phoenician religion played a key role. The people of Tyre worshipped a heroic god known as Melkart, a warrior hero who the Greeks would later associate with Hercules. Temples to Melkart were set up at multiple Phoenician trading posts, and most had an olive tree, a symbol of the city of Tyre, growing in their central courtyard. The grandest of these temples was built at the furthest Phoenician colony from Tyre, then known as Gades, what is now the Spanish city of Cadiz. This colony sat on the Atlantic coast, just outside the Straits of Gibraltar, but it made up for its extreme distance from Tyre with its immense opulence. At the centre of the temple stood an olive tree, with its branches and leaves wrought out of solid gold, holding emerald fruits in its branches. Women were forbidden entry to the temple, as were pigs, and the priests of Melkart went barefoot, wearing a band of Egyptian flax over their bare heads. The Greek geographer Strabo recounts the following description of the settlement of Gades.
Now these islands are this side of what are called the Pillars of Heracles. Gades, however, is outside the pillars. Here live the men who fit out the most and largest merchant vessels, both for our sea and the outer sea. They say the Tyrians believed that the two capes which formed the strait were the ends of the inhabited world.
A great ceremony, known as the Agersis, or Awakening, was conducted each year in the temple of Gades. During this time, all foreigners were asked to leave the city, and a great effigy of the god Melkart was set afloat on the sea and burned. And even this temple was a crucial part of the Phoenician trading system. The institution worked to guarantee the quality of metal ingots produced in Gades by giving them a special stamp, and acted as a guarantor between merchants entering into contracts, with punishments promised from Melkart himself if any dared to go back on their word. With Phoenician trade increasingly drifting westward, the centre of their power would soon also shift in that direction, to a place where they would finally be free of the overbearing empires constantly breathing down their necks. They would soon found a city on the shore of North Africa, right at the centre of the Mediterranean world. A city that would become one of the largest and wealthiest on earth. That city would one day be known as Carthage. Like so many aspects of our modern understanding of the Phoenicians, the name Carthage is itself a distortion, filtered through the accounts of others. In Latin, the city was known as Carthago, while the Greeks called it Carchedon, but to its inhabitants, it was known Stricken with grief, Elishaya flees down to the docks, along with a ragtag band of her royal guards and temple women, and there they set sail westwards and make for Africa. The Roman writer Justinus, drawing on an earlier Greek text, writes his rendition of this story, along with a cunning deception to slow down any greedy pursuers.
Alyssa put the attendants, who were sent by the king to assist in her removal, on board some